Hello, you're watching video one in the Van City Business Climate Series on decarbonization. I'm Jill Doucette, Executive Director of the Synergy Foundation. Before we get started, we want to respectfully acknowledge that we're presenting today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish and Kwakwaka'wakw people. If you live or work in BC, you already know we are in a state of climate emergency here and around the world. We've seen heat waves top the charts, communities stricken by floods. And we know that for every 1 degree the planet warms, we see 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. And that really changes everything. We need all hands on deck to adapt to the new reality, reduce emissions, and build a low carbon economy. For business, this can be an opportunity to innovate, to reduce costs, and prepare for the future. To talk about decarbonization, we need to cover a few basics. So let's get started in talking about your business's carbon footprint. Greenhouse gases, what contribute to a carbon footprint, are atmospheric gases that absorb infrared radiation. And there are a number of greenhouse gases, but let's look at a few common sources. The one you're probably most familiar with is combustion engines producing CO2 emissions or carbon dioxide. Other common refrigerants include hydrofluorocarbons from refrigeration, methane from natural gas or compost, nitrous oxide from cultivated soils, nitrogen trifluoride from manufacturing and electronics, and sulfur hexafluoride from electrical transmission distribution, manufacturing of electronics and semiconductors. These are just a few common sources that contribute to the broader greenhouse gases. So let's look at how those greenhouse gases contribute to your business's carbon footprint. The first step in looking at the carbon footprint of your business is to outline your scope and determine your emission sources. Emission sources are broken down into scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 are emissions that are typically combusted on site, either as stationary combustion in things like natural gas, or in vehicles your company may own or operate, burning fossil fuels. Scope 2 are emission sources from electricity, and Scope 3 are emission sources from indirect activities such as purchasing and using paper, producing waste, business travel, staff commuting, etc. All of those scopes of emissions and all of the activities that produce greenhouse gases collectively form your total carbon footprint as a business. So let's look at a few key business examples to give you an idea of what a carbon footprint may look like for businesses in different sectors. The first example is a hotel business. And as you might imagine with a hotel, one of their most common sources of emissions are in the building that they operate. In the case of this hotel, their main emission source is natural gas from heating the building. Their next common source of emissions is from electricity to operate the building. This is followed by staff commuting and waste from landfill waste. In total, this business's carbon footprint is around 500 tons, which is quite significant. The next example is a restaurant business. And similar to the hotel, one of its main emission sources is from natural gas from the kitchen, from cooking and operating equipment. Other significant greenhouse gases associated with this restaurant come from staff commuting. Restaurants typically have a wide employee base, so those employees getting to work contributes to the carbon footprint. An interesting source in this restaurant is paper. 14% comes from paper, which is a pretty significant emission source. And this is because this restaurant does a significant amount of takeout. So the paper is associated with all of the packaging. In total, this business's carbon footprint is just over 200 tons of emissions. The next example, which is quite different from the first two, is a construction business. In this case, their main emission source comes from fuel use, from equipment on site, and from driving vehicles. Their secondary emission source comes from natural gas. This is from their head office and operating their building, primarily heating and cooling of that building. The next most significant emission source is from shipping, from moving of materials and construction equipment to the site, followed by some other smaller emission sources such as staff commuting, waste, and electricity. The total emissions for this business is just over 500 tons. The final example is a manufacturing business. This business has emission sources that primarily come from their plant and from moving goods to their customers. Their most significant emission source is natural gas, and this is from running the processing equipment within the plant to produce their goods. Their next most significant emission source is from fuel use, having the company fleet deliver those goods to their customers. And their third most significant emission source is from shipping, and this is for raw materials and good to arrive at the plant for processing. And this shipping is done by a third party, therefore it's a Scope 3 emission source. In total, the emissions of this manufacturing business is just over 300 tons. So you may be thinking, I can understand where some of my emission sources come from, but how do I really look at decarbonizing my business and tackling these emission sources as a business strategy? Here's some things you might think about. Oftentimes, reducing your greenhouse gas emissions is also associated with reducing your operational costs. For example, heating efficiency in your building will significantly reduce your greenhouse gas emissions while also reducing your costs operationally long term. Understanding your emission sources will also give you an opportunity to track your environmental performance, set goals, and become more efficient as a business. These activities can also strengthen community and government relations, and we anticipate there will be more regulatory compliance down the road. As well, these activities are going to enhance your brand and help you establish credibility as a company that has strong values and is contributing to the community as a whole. Working on decarbonization is also a great way to engage your stakeholders, aligning your climate action with the needs and values of your clients, customers, and workforce. For example, if a significant emission source for your business is staff commuting, you may consider having transit pass program. This would allow you to reduce your emissions associated with commuting while providing a valuable employee perk. And of course, your business taking action on reducing greenhouse gases will help reduce the collective impacts of climate change. You also might consider that investing in your business in these ways is an important resiliency strategy. Investing in a low carbon future and making your business a part of that transition ensures your operations will align with the 2030 goals that have been set by many organizations. And finally, working on decarbonization is a great way to attract and retain values-aligned employees. Understanding carbon footprinting is the first step in business taking action against climate change. But most businesses have questions about how to accurately measure their carbon footprint, how they can reduce their emissions, and make their business more successful in the process. In video 2 in this series, we will talk about how to measure your business emissions in more detail. And in video 3, we will talk about decarbonization opportunities and funding the transition. Thank you for watching, and we hope you'll join us for videos 2 and 3 in the Van City Business Climate series.